Welcome to Burgh Castle in Norfolk, which is one of the Saxon Shore forts, one of about 9 defending the coast of southeast Britain. We have evidence from a 4th century document known as the Notitia Dignitatum that the fort name was known as Garaia Nonanum. 3 of the fort walls still survive intact. Over the years, the west wall of the fort has sadly collapsed down the hillside, but we still have the other 3 walls, including the north wall, which has a small port gate in it, with a bastion which is now slowly subsiding down the hillside. Here we have an internal view of the port gate with the bastion now collapsed down the hill. By the mid-3rd century, the empire was in turmoil with civil wars, invasions, pressure from climatic changes and plague. What we know now as the North Sea was a great trading route into mainland Europe, but increasingly piracy became a major issue, with the Saxons beginning to push ever westwards north of the empire. With security in the North Sea being a major issue, a series of forts started to be built along the coastline. These became known as the Saxon Shore forts. This was overseen by the Count of the Saxon Shore forts. Steadily over the course of the end of the century, a number of forts were built. These include Richborough, Reculver, Porchester. There was also a Saxon Shore fort at Dover, which obviously now is still used as a major route into Europe. The fort now lies under the town, but if you visit the Roman painted house in the centre of Dover, you can actually see a small section of it preserved. Over the centuries, Burgh Castle has been extensively robbed for its stone and its flint. Ivy, over the years, now cleared away, has caused fissures to open up in the walls. But the walls are still nearly full height with their drum bastions. Earlier military forts in Britain show quite regular patterns, but the Saxon Shore forts show considerable regional variation. The plans and building techniques are roughly the same, but the bastions and gateways all show considerable differences. This is the eastern gate into the fort, which just had one single portal, possibly a superstructure of stone with an arch and wooden gates, although early excavations seem to indicate a timber frame inserted into the walls. Unlike earlier forts, the Saxon Shore forts didn't seem to have any substantial buildings in the centre, at least none that have survived. We can see here the badly robbed internal walls of the fort. A parapet with crenellations and maybe wooden stairs would have led up to the top of the wall to defend the fort. It seems the curtain wall was built to the fort, and then the drum-shaped bastions were added on later, keyed in. On the top, holes have been found which could have held a fighting platform or possibly a base for ballistas, large crossbows in effect. The stratified red tiles you can see in the wall every so often basically formed a levelling course to keep the wall straight as it was being built, also maybe some aesthetic effect as well. The forts were never really intended to be defended. Cavalry and troops would have sallied out in the event of an invasion on the coast or an incursion by pirates. It's possible up to 1,000 troops and maybe 500 cavalry could have been stationed here, depending on the unit. The last troops we know were here were from Germany around about the 390s AD, and it may be them that left some fine glass vessels behind on site when they departed. This is the south wall of the fort, and it was also the site of a Norman Motte and Bailey castle. This large chunk of stone we're passing now is actually part of the bastion of the wall, which was still standing in the 18th century. Nothing now remains of the Norman castle. The ditch is barely visible around it, and that was backfilled. The rest of the motte was cleared away in the 19th century. In the Roman period, a substantial estuary would have stretched under the fort with a harbour for unloading ships. Now, over the years, the estuary is silted up, but the river still flows through and is still used by pleasure craft now, doing the Norfolk Broads. We get a view looking down the hill there. We can see the reed beds, the River Waveney, a windmill in the distance, what would have been a fantastic Roman harbour filled with vessels for trading, a few naval vessels possibly. Although the west wall has gone, collapsed down the slope, excavators found substantial remains of the foundations, and below those, oak posts hammered into the grounds to create a stable foundation for the wall. With the Norman motte cleared away, the wall of the fort is visible. We can see built onto the internal wall post slots for beams, possibly for internal buildings, maybe for the rampart. If you do visit the fort, it's definitely worth hunting these out. It's a nice little aspect of how the fort was built and put together. The 286 Carausius, who titled himself Emperor of the North, took control of Britain until he was assassinated by his treasurer Electus. Electus didn't rule for long. In 296 AD, Constantius Chlorus sent an invading force back to retake Britannia for the empire. Electus fled inland and was possibly killed around Silchester. Constantius campaigned several times in Britain, finally dying in York in the early 4th century, and his son Constantine was declared emperor by the troops there. Into the 5th century, as the Romans departed, the site seems to have become a monastery, as graves and buildings have been found internally, and Bede mentions a monastery being founded in 633 here. Thanks for watching, and if you'd like to like and subscribe, it really helps the channel to create more content. Thanks.